Some say loyalty is all we ever had.
You know I've been loyal. I'm thinking it's time. I want to be made.
See this mouse? He says you're one of us. But was wrong. You got as much chance as being one of us as this little mouse right here.
Stay still. Don't even think about it.
You know you should wear a mask. I can see your whole face.
What we doing, partner? Right on time, partner. We gotta go now.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 219. Out now on video on demand is Vault, a true story based in 1975 about two low-level criminals who take part in one of the biggest heists in American history. Set in Providence, Rhode Island, and starring an all-star cast including Theo, Chazz Palminteri, and Don Johnson. Vault delves into an often overlooked moment in America's rich history of organised crime and does so with energy and style. And I'm happy to say that the film's director and co-writer Tom DeNucci is here to join me to talk about the movie. Tom, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast.
Hey Matt, thanks for having me.
So this is really interesting, just reading back about the sponsored Vault heist. Now, you are a Rhode Island native. I'm just curious, when was the first time you heard about it? I mean, was this something like it's akin to like a folk story when you were growing up?
It sure was, Matt. You know, I'm Italian American, and in my neighborhood, it's comprised of predominantly Italian American people. And this is a story that I heard my uncles talk about and my cousins talk about at the old, at the dinner table, at family parties and things like that. And in my home state of Rhode Island, it's one of those things where we don't have a professional sports team, so we all follow gangsters. We're all kind of excited by it. For whatever reason, there was a large organized crime presence in Rhode Island. And it's in the news all the time, especially back in the 70s and 80s. And we kind of grew up just hearing about these characters and these larger-than-life figures that kind of roam the streets of Providence and, had a Robin Hood quality to them where, at times they did do some positive things for the community. But, of course, at the same time, they were extremely notorious men, and there was murder and mayhem mixed in the pot as well. So this is a story that kind of involves a lot of those characters. And to me, growing up hearing this story, this was the most exciting one because of, obviously, who would have the guts to rob from the mob. Robbing from other organized crime figures seems to be one of the dumbest things you could possibly do. And sure enough, this kind of ragtag, low-level band of not made men. It's very important, just to give you a quick backstory, in the Italian Cosa Nostra. La Cosa Nostra, that's another word for the Black Hand. It's basically another word for organized crime, Italian Americans. You had to be a made guy, and that basically meant that nobody could mess with you. Nobody could order a hit on you without permission from everybody else. And you were officially a member of the club, so to speak. The guys who robbed the place, they weren't members of the club. They were in fact a group of outsiders, which makes this even more interesting because you've got this group of outsiders who had the guts to take on the mafia and rob this coveted mob bank, if you will.
That's these outsiders, these low-level guys, would even attempt to pull off something like this and go against the mob in that way. Did that say something about the, I wouldn't say power struggle, but the lack of respect that certain criminal people had for the mob at that time? I mean, was the power of the mob at that time waning to the point where people could pull off a heist like this?
Well, the power wasn't necessarily waning, but the figurehead in charge, his power was in question. Depicted by Chazz Palminteri in the film, we have our character Raymond Petriarca. And Raymond was in jail at the time of the heist. And what was happening was the envelopes that would come to Raymond while he was in jail, the kickbacks, the patronage that his men would have to give back to him, the percentage was going down and he was getting less and less money from a lot of the other organized crime syndicates. So he felt as though that, wow, people aren't really, respecting my authority. So yeah, there was a degree of that because a lot of the prominent Italian figureheads were behind bars at the time. But, of course, what we later learned to find out, a leader of one of these organized crime syndicates being in jail certainly didn't mean that he was no longer in charge. A lot of them were able to continue conducting business as usual from the confines of their prison cell.
I found it really interesting how you were talking about Raymond Patriarca, and it seemed at that time especially, the 70s, maybe even the 60s as well, there were certain organised crime figures notorious for where they came from, the areas that did their work in, and also how they kind of became beneficiaries for their communities. Harlem at the time, you had Bumpy Johnson and Frank Lucas. In this case, you had Raymond. I think I saw an interview with you how you were talking about back in those days, if you were in a neighborhood that was oversaw by, say, Arabian Patriarcha, you can leave your doors open, unlocked at night because no one dare would try to do anything at that time. I'm really curious about the relationship between, say, your average Joe citizen of Providence, Rhode Island, compared to an outsider. How do they see Raymond? Did they kind of shrug off his indiscretions because of the good he was doing for a community, or did they very much look at him as someone who should be feared?
Well, I think as like any polarizing character like that, there was people on both sides of the fence, and some people right on the fence. And I think it came down to the people of the community felt protected in a sense that, you know, you're not going to have some punk kids break into your house and terrorize the neighborhood, because these guys would keep the streets safe from that kind of skullduggery, if you will. But what would end up happening was, of course, you'd still end up with dead people on the streets occasionally. So it's kind of like, you know, it wasn't all good. So I don't really have much of an opinion on that because, to be honest with you, that stuff happened a little bit before my time. You know, a lot of that stuff was going down in the 70s and early 80s, and it's hard for me to weigh in because I wasn't alive during the time, but everything that I've read from accounts and interviews that I've conducted with people who were in the neighborhoods and were on both sides of the law at that time, Raymond was a very respected guy throughout the community. People really did think that he did positive things for the people of Providence, Rhode Island, and other parts of Rhode Island. And overall, I think that the general consensus on the mafia at the time was if you don't mess with them, they're not going to mess with you. I mean, we're not talking about terrorists. These people weren't going to just, you know, randomly, harass somebody. Usually, if you had a problem with the mafia, it's because you got into business with the mafia or you made a deal with the mafia. And a lot of that stuff came with, obviously, a known connotation that, hey, if you cross these guys, they're not going to take you to court. You know, they're going to handle it in their own matters. They're going to put justice and take justice into their own hands. And that's just something that people knew when they were getting involved with them in the first place.
How did it come to you and the people you were working with wanting to make this film? Was it because it's really interesting to me because a lot of people watch crime movies, but this story in particular, considering its standing in American crime history, isn't something a lot of people really touched. I think there was a book about it that was released some years ago, but other than that, it's not something that people talk about quite a bit. So why the decision from yourself to want to make a movie about it?
Well, I think that a lot of that has to do with it happened in a really small city in a really small state. In fact, the smallest state in the country. So I think for a lot of years it was overshined by things like the Lufthansa heist and a lot of bigger capers that went down in New York. And, you know, it just was overshadowed by a lot of that. And the truth is, the Bonded Vault probably isn't the only story like that. You know, the organized crime kind of ruled the roost. The Italian mafia ruled the roost here in the United States for decades and decades. You know, you're talking all the way back to, you know, the 20s and all the way through the early 90s. And, you know, a lot of exciting things probably happened in that time span. So I think it's just a matter of, there are a lot of these stories that people probably haven't heard of. And the reason why I wanted to make it a movie was because I remember being a little 12-year-old, chubby little 12-year-old Italian kid hearing the story from an uncle or a cousin. And long before I even knew I wanted to have a career in movies, I remember saying, wow, why isn't this a movie? This story would make a great movie. And this is long before I knew that I was going to become a filmmaker. It just sounded like the stuff of movies, as they say, you know?
Yeah, because it's almost stranger than fiction, I think, in some ways. Just the gumption that these guys had and just how everything kind of unravels at the end, it just makes such good film material. So do you approach your producers? I know you work quite a bit with Chad A30. You collaborated with him when you were an actor back in the days of like Incubus and Lucy's, and he's a producer that's gone on to do some really big things. Bleed for This, working alongside Martin Scorsese on Silence, is now producing The Irishman. Do you approach him and say, hey, I think this is going to be a great story, let's see if we can put something together?
Well, it was kind of an interesting route that we took. You know, I had always heard about this story, and I always wanted to do something with it, but it was on the back burner. As you know, as filmmakers, we all have a dozen, maybe 24 movies that we'd hope to make someday. So this was probably at the forefront of the one I wanted to make. And then Chad and I, who have been collaborators for many years now, well, we had been working on a story about Raymond Petrarch as a standalone story. That's something that Chad had cooking. That was one of his passion projects that he had in the mix for a long time in his filmmaker dream Rolodex. So we kind of got together on that, and we started doing some research, and I said to myself, you know what? It's like, Chad, you know, this Bonded Vault thing and this Raymond thing, they're kind of very closely connected here. Maybe the idea is to tie these two together and tell the story of the Bonded Vault with the backdrop of the looming presence of Raymond Petrarch's crime empire hanging above us, you know. And of course, I don't want to give away any spoilers. I don't know how your show works, if people have already seen the movie or whatever, but there's a very kind of important moment at the end of the movie, which is why I wanted to really make the movie in the first place, that makes you realize just what a cool character Raymond is, you know, right from jump. So it kind of just made sense for us to tell the story of the Bonded Vault with Raymond as the kind of, you know, the looming figure
when it comes
in the
to
shadows.
And when it comes to casting the lead roles of Deuce and Chucky, these are the low-level criminals we've been talking about who dared to pull off this heist. On one end, you have Theo Rossi, a lot of people know from Sons of Anarchy and Luke Cage. Now, he is from New York, from Staten Island to be specific. On the other end, in the role of Chucky, you got Clive Standen, who's as far away from New York as they come. Born in Northern Ireland, he comes from Britain. People know him from Vikings. How did it come to that you got these two guys working together, especially Clive? Because Theo, there's a connection there, and I've read in interviews that he knew about the Vault's heist as well, and it was something he always was interested in. Clive Standen, however, comes from a different part of the world. How did they both come to play Deuce and Chucky in your movie?
Well, Theo was kind of a no-brainer, and he was actually the first actor we had onto the movie, and Chad and him had already had a great relationship together. They had made a film together, and he just made so much sense because, like you said, he's from Staten Island. He's a New Yorker. He understands what the looming power of organized crime and the Italian mafia is all about. When we got on the phone and had our first conversation, I heard his voice, and he had asked me what the accent was like, and I heard him say 2 sentences, and I said, I don't think you're going to have a problem, Theo, because that New York accent's not that far. You know, we're only a short drive up the highway, up Route 95, Rhode Island to New York, so the accent's not that different. So it just made so much sense, and it was a no-brainer for Theo to play Deuce. And then for Chucky, you know, we had our casting agent had given us a number of people to look at, and I had talked to quite a few actors, and I had a Skype session with Clive, and one thing about Chucky that I always read about was he was this big kind of rogue figure. He was a real badass. I mean, he could fight. He could really hold his own and handle himself, and I wanted that actor to be very big and physical. And I got on a Skype with Clive, and we just got to talking. And aside from the fact that he was just a very interesting person, he cared about the story, and I could tell that he had done a little bit of his homework, and it was exciting to him. And we got to talking, and then I hear that he's this former kickboxer, and he was a competitive kickboxer, highly ranked when he was a young man, and actually fought professionally at times, and that kind of just rang a bell in my head. And then, of course, he had already done a ton of action stuff in his series Taken and Vikings, and we just got to talking, and it made a lot of sense. And then as far as the accent goes, Clive is one of the hardest working, more dedicated actors I've ever worked with. He worked day and night to get that accent right. He listened to tapes. And actually, one thing he said, which was pretty cool, he said, "Tom, I want to hang out with a lot of the guys, some of the Rhode Islanders, some of your pals." And the guy who plays Buddy Cranston, his name's Nick Principe, and he's one of my best friends from Rhode Island. We kind of both had this career in acting, and he went off to L.A. and did his thing, and we had linked up, and he's kind of a longtime collaborator of mine. And Nick's a good old-fashioned Rhode Island guy, likes to hang out in Providence, likes to go to the bars, likes to go to concerts, things like that. So Nick and him would hang out. Clive and Nick would hang out, and Nick kind of was his ambassador to Rhode Island and showed him all the hot spots on Federal Hill in Providence, which is kind of where all the gangsters used to hang out. It was great. Clive really wanted to soak up the culture and listen to what these people really sound like. So he spent some time in Rhode Island right before we shot and really became like a sponge, and he nailed it. I tell people to this day, like, "Hey, did you know that Clive's from the UK?" And they're like, "Get out of here. No way." I'm like, "Oh, yeah. No, that's a total accent that he's putting on." So credit to him, because he's fooling everybody.
Yeah, it's a great accent. I mean, afterwards, I was like, who's playing Chucky? Because I haven't really seen him before. TV's not my thing. I'm so busy watching movies just as my job and such. I was like, wow, he's a Brit. Never would have guessed that, because the accent is just so convincing. Surrounding Theo and Clive, you have kind of like a who's who of legendary actors in supporting roles. Don Johnson, William Forsythe. There's Chuck Zito's there for a little bit. Vincent Pastore makes an appearance, so does Burt Young. What I'm really interested in, though, is getting Chazz Palminteri to play Raymond, because Chazz Palminteri is a really interesting guy. Because while he does play a lot of kind of like heavy characters and mob characters, etc., his background's the theatre. A Bronx Tale, a lot of people don't know, is that was based on his life. It was like a play that he put together way back, and then that kind of vaulted him into the roles that he's known for now. Was he your number one guy that you wanted to go to play the role of Raymond Patriarca?
He was a guy that we weren't sure that we were going to be able to get because of scheduling. So I was really hoping that we would be able to get him, and it kind of came right down to the wire. And I remember being told, I was sitting there eating lunch, and I remember being told literally like a week before production, "Okay, it's official. Chazz is in to play Raymond." So it was really exciting for me, because it's just like such a slam dunk for Chazz Palminteri to play Raymond Patriarca. I mean, I remember taking a side-by-side photograph of the two men and comparing them, and it's really uncanny. The resemblance is there. Obviously, Chazz can play these characters in his sleep. This is what he kind of has made a living doing for many years, and it's beyond him just, dialing up, "Okay, let me play generic mob guy number one." He knew all about Raymond Patriarca. He knew all about the kind of subtle sense of humor that Raymond had. He knew all about his operation and how powerful he was. So it was a pleasure to work with a guy who understood the character before we even started shooting. Of course, Raymond. I met his son. That's what he said to me. So it was incredible to have him. And I would say, I never play favorites, because I obviously had I had a memorable moment with every actor in the entire set. But it was really something for me to work with Chazz, because growing up, obviously, I'm an Italian kid from Cranston, Rhode Island. That's very similar kind of demographic to, the story that we see in A Bronx Tale. And that was a movie that I remember I was probably about the same age as Little C when that movie came out. And I remember watching it with my parents as like a little 7 or 8 year old, probably a little too young to be watching it at the time, and just like being enthralled with the movie and enthralled with Chazz Palminteri and his performance. And he was kind of a new actor on the scene back in the early 90s. And I was just like, who is this guy? He's awesome. So it's pretty surreal to, cut to 20 years later, whatever it was. And I got a chance to have him play in my film as our mafia figure, Don. So life is a funny thing sometimes, and it's just when you're in entertainment, it's kind of fun to work with people. I'm not above saying that. Yeah, I'm a fan of this guy. I grew up loving his work. So, I still get excited. This is my 6th film, but I still get excited to work with some of these guys that I grew up on.
Vault is, of course, a period movie set in the 1970s. I'm curious, Tom, when it comes to, you shot this film in Rhode Island, where a lot of this action happened. When it comes to the city's infrastructure, its architecture, has a lot changed over the years? Can you still shoot in certain locations, use certain buildings that are very much like they were back then? Or was there certain changes that you had to kind of like move around and you had to get a little inventive with it?
Rhode Island is a very classic place, especially Providence, and not a whole lot has changed in the downtown area. Although there are a lot of high-rises that have been put there that weren't there back in the 70s and things like that, there are certain nooks and crannies of the city that just flat out have not changed since the 70s. So we really benefited from jumping in there and finding those spots that could kind of sell the fact that we were in a bigger city than we were actually in that era. And of course, we did a lot of trickery. I was talking to some friends as we were watching the movie the other day, and someone had mentioned, they saw like visual effects. They're like, oh, what visual effects were there? And I was like, you'd be surprised how much visual effects are in this film that you can't even see, that are there to remove things that gave away the current period. So a lot of times we'd go in, and if there was like a fancy sign that was light up and neon or whatever that might not have existed in the 70s, we'd remove it. If there was a security camera on the side of a building that clearly wouldn't be there in the 70s, we'd have to remove it. So there was even an entire building that wasn't there in one of the skyline shots that we were able to remove. So CGI has come a long way, and a lot of times, to me, the greatest special effects or visual effects, they're the ones that you don't even know are there.
I'm just curious about shooting a period film in regards to technology, meaning if you do a heist movie these days, or let's make, for example, a horror movie, because you have a background in that as well. In the 1970s, you walk into a room, it's dark, the light switch doesn't work, you're stuffed. You got nowhere to go and you can't see anything. These days, you can pull out your iPhone and you can switch on that little light and it kind of ruins everything. And I think with a heist movie, you got the similar kind of stuff. You take away advantages that certain characters might have. Usually in this film, it's like, don't raise the alarm, don't do stuff like that. If this heist was based in today's day and age, someone might get on their phone and text someone or call someone, etc. Does working in a time period that doesn't have those kind of technological advances, does that free you up to be able to do really good stuff with tension, with character and things like that?
Oh, of course. And if anything, it's just a great kind of look into a window to the past. I mean, the opening conversation of the film, we've got Deuce and Chucky arguing over whether or not they're going to wear a mask. And there's even a line about like, hey, I heard they got cameras at the banks in California. They got those these days. And he's like, I don't care. I'm not. Nobody cares about your face. Nobody remembers that stuff. I'm not wearing a mask.
Which is just insane to me, by the way. When I saw that, I was like, wow, this guy's really confident.
Well, yeah, and you got to imagine, obviously, it's pretty brazen, but he's got a point. I mean, back then when there aren't security cameras, it's really hard to make an eyewitness account of someone and get it to a T, especially when you're nervous. So it's one of those things where, yeah, that was a big factor, and it's just it's very freeing, and it's a lot of fun. Just I'm a historian. I'm a big history buff. I love to kind of take a look into the past and kind of see how things were in certain decades. And I think all filmmakers are kind of, whether they know it or not, sort of historians, visual historians, and it's just kind of fun to think that, like, wow, it really was the Wild West back then in a lot of ways. I mean, security-wise, if you think about it, not a whole lot had changed from 1975 to like 1875. Before the advent of video cameras in every building. I mean, nowadays, you can't walk down the street without being recorded by probably 6 or 7 different cameras that you didn't even know were there. Yeah. They're just like on telephone poles, checking traffic, and you could be picked up on a camera. Whereas back then, I mean, geez, to have a security camera, there might have been just, at the White House, might have had a security camera. It'd be a very rare thing. So it's a lot of fun to play in those worlds, and technology certainly plays a hand in all that.
This film, Vault, is definitely the biggest one that you worked on as a director and a writer. You come from a background of low-budget independent fare, and then you move onto something like this, which is also an independent film, but much more substantial to the other films you had before. I read a quote where you said that this project, the budget on this project, was bigger than all of your other projects combined before that. When that happens, is it more money, more problems, or is it more of a luxury that you have more resources to work with?
It can be more money, more problems, because what ends up happening is, naturally, when you have a little bit more money to play with, there's a trickle down across the board. The crew that you work with, everybody costs a little bit more, or the cast that you're working with is going to cost a little bit more. At the end of the day, the money that you have to actually make the film, meaning the nuts and bolts, doesn't go up as much as you think, because a lot of that's going to union fees and things like that. And the benefit there and why it's a great thing is because now I'm able to work with people that have been doing this for 20 years, and it's like, no offense to any of the people that I worked with in the past. In fact, if you look at my track record, I tend to bring a lot of people from job to job. I like to work with a lot of the same people, and a lot of my closest friends and colleagues have kind of grown with me, and we've all gotten a little bit better every film. But for the most part, it's great to work on a union film and work with the gaffer or the grip who's been doing it for over a decade and then some, and they know how to get yourself out of any jam that you may find yourself in. And when you come up with an idea or a concept of how you want to shoot something that even you might, quite frankly, aren't sure how you want to accomplish it, but you can certainly you can explain what you want to do, and then they're the guys who say, oh yeah, well, all we do is we get a 10-by, we set it up right here, we get to track some dollies, some curved track, bring it around. Like, they kind of just, they have the ability to make your wildest dreams come true. So that was the biggest benefit to me, working with a bigger crew. A lot of the more ambitious shots that I would, before maybe scratch my head and my crew would we'd all have to take a little extra time to figure out, these folks just kind of know how to do it, so that was the benefit there. But yeah, it was really exciting playing at this level. It was a blast. And, the thing was that a lot of people don't realize, although this movie was 10 times bigger than anything I had shot before, it was really not that much longer of a production schedule. I had 18 days to shoot this movie. We shot 16 days in Rhode Island, and then we shot 2 pickup days in LA to make it look like it was, the desert of Las Vegas, outside Las Vegas. So, we're not talking about a 25 or a 35 or, a day shoot or one of these, long kind of campaigns here. This was a very much still, I don't want to call it a run and gun shoot, but it was still very much fast paced, shooting 6 pages a day, and then some. And, it was a real jam to get this movie shot in 18 days. So that's kind of why I'd have to lean more towards it was more money, more problems, because you have a lot more exciting toys to play with, but you still only have the same amount of days to work with. So, that's where you learn. It's always a learning process, but overall, the crafty was a lot better. The food's a lot better.
Sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. Okay, I'm back on track. I talk to a lot of filmmakers, independent filmmakers, and I talk about distribution, and I talk quite a bit about the playing field right now, or the platforms available right now to get your movie out there. Once upon a time, it was just a cinema, and then it turned to cinema video, then straight to DVD, then now video on demand streaming. Yourself as a filmmaker, I know that Vault had a cinema release, limited cinema release in the States, but for most people around the world, a lot of my listeners as well, video on demand is where they're gonna watch it. When you're filming a movie, do you keep that in mind, or is it just go out there, make the best film you can, and whoever is going to watch it are going to watch it on all types of devices, and you just have to cater to all those tastes?
No, I never try to paint myself into a corner by saying, ooh, let me adjust this shot, because they won't totally get the true magnitude of it if it's not on a big screen, if they're watching it on a phone. I think that's kind of putting the cart before the horse. For me, like you said, I try to just make the best movie I can make with the time I have to make it in and the budget I have to make it with. And, I feel as though people will always be attracted to something that's exciting, something that's great, whether they're watching it on a phone or on a tablet or on their computer. So I think the important thing is just make great movies, and then, people are going to find there's a million ways to watch them,
Very true. And look, we're living in a time right now where Martin Scorsese's next film is going straight to Netflix. And I think this is like a big kind of monumental shift where we have great filmmakers, classic filmmakers making films for streaming companies. And I think something like The Irishman, which in a lot of ways is very much has a relationship with the characters and the tone of your movie as well, that's going to change some things. And so I'm really excited to see where the future goes. I'm really excited to see what you're going to do in the future. I read that you're working on a sci-fi feature next.
Yeah, that's right. Speaking of the future, we have a movie, myself and my writing partner, B. Dolan, who can't say enough great things about B, and he's really one of the driving creative forces behind a lot of the movies I've made. We made a movie called Almost Mercy together that I'm very, very proud of. We, of course, wrote Vault together, and now our next mission is a movie called Jungle Room. We're also bringing on a writer by the name of Matt Weiss, and of course Chad Verdi is going to produce that one. And this movie takes a look into the not too distant future, and you had mentioned a lot of changes culturally that's going on right now, just without means of watching movies. Well, guess what? As you know, that's trickling down to changing the way we do everything, the way we communicate with people, the way we approach our jobs, the way we approach relationships, our bank accounts. Everything is becoming very advanced. And of course, the catchword you're hearing a lot is AI, and AI is really becoming a big part of our lives. Well, my next film kind of takes a look at the future of that and what happens when humans and AI kind of are roaming the earth at the same level in a weird way, and what happens when things like social media really jump forward, and just what is going to happen to us as people, and how will we change? And of course, there's a lot more to it than that. I don't want to give away too many spoilers about this one just yet.
Yeah.
Again, we still are scripting it. We're in the creative process right now, but we have a really great draft that we're excited about, and we're honing in on it. And this is a chance for us to tell a story in a different time period. Instead of the 70s, we're jumping about 100 years into the future. So it's going to be fun to extrapolate. I've always loved the concept of extrapolation and taking what we have today and thinking about what it's going to be like in the future. That's always been an exciting notion of mine ever since I was a little kid. I loved concept cars when I was a little kid, and I loved looking at, photos of illustrations of what life in space will be like and things like that. This is my chance to kind of maybe tell that story for the little kid or the younger person of today who can watch this film and kind of let their mind travel into what the future will be like. And I think it also has a little bit of it's got something to say too about where we might be headed.
But before that movie comes out, I can encourage everyone out there to check out Vault. You can go to a Facebook page at Vault Movie, and they have all sorts of info on there where you can access the movie and watch it. Like I said, it's got a great cast: Theo, Rossi, Clive, Standen, Samara Wiley, Don Johnson, Chazz Palminteri, William Forsythe. Very energetic, stylish film, great period piece movie done on an independent budget. And Tom DeNucci, I congratulate you on that, and congratulations on the movie. And
Thank you.
I look forward to chatting in the future when more movies from you come out.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. I really I want to thank you again for having me on, and thanks to the listeners out there. It's really great chatting with you today.